Kaliningrad had long been Vladimir Putin's westernmost stronghold, an unshakable symbol of his power and deterrence. However, on September 19, 2025, the strongest wall of this stronghold was not breached by a missile attack, but by the cutting of a cable. Lithuania ended Kaliningrad's decades-long captivity by physically severing its last electricity connection with Russia. This move not only plunged the city into darkness, but also deprived Putin of one of his most effective weapons, energy blackmail. First, to understand why this radical decision was taken, we need to look at how Russia uses energy as a weapon. For decades, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania were tied to Russia through the BRELL network, established during the Soviet era. BRELL is a massive electricity grid designed during the Soviet era and named after the first letters of Belarus, Russia, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. Built in the 1950s and 60s, the primary purpose of this system was to weaken the political independence of the countries in the region by fully integrating them into Moscow's energy system. Russian power plants in centers like Smolensk supplied the entire Baltic region with energy at a fixed frequency of 50 Hz, keeping the lights on from Tallinn to Kaliningrad. However, this was not an energy service, but political dominance. With a single order from the Kremlin, the Baltic capitals could be plunged into darkness and cold in the middle of winter. This was not just a theoretical fear. Russia had played this blackmail card many times before. In 2006, when Ukraine fell out with Russia over gas prices, the Kremlin turned off the taps. In 2009, Bulgaria and Romania suffered the same fate. When the war began in Ukraine in 2022, Gazprom halted gas shipments to Poland and Bulgaria, which refused to pay in rubles. Russia had thus turned its energy resources into a political weapon. This was an invisible chain of captivity that persisted even after the fall of the Iron Curtain. After Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania gained their independence in 1991, breaking this energy bond became their most important strategic goal. Because Russia had the power to cut off the electricity flowing through the veins of the Baltic countries with a single command. This was as easy as pressing a button, and the consequences could be as devastating as war. The lights would go out, cities would be plunged into darkness, and hospitals would lose their vital machinery. Neonatal units would sound alarms, operating rooms would stop, and the balance between life and death in intensive care could be upset in an instant. Electric pumps would stop working, and water would stop flowing from the taps. Overnight, thirst, cold, and chaos would reign. That is why the energy issue was not just an infrastructure problem, but a matter of survival for a nation. In a statement earlier this year, the Prime Minister of Lithuania said that remaining connected to BRELL was equivalent to handing Moscow a loaded weapon. According to him, severing this connection was not a choice, but a matter of survival. For this reason, the Baltic countries have fought a silent and determined battle for decades to free themselves from this dependence. The solution was to break away from Russia and connect to the massive European ENTSO E network, which covers 34 countries. This process, which began after joining the EU in 2004, required billions of euros in investment. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia implemented a massive investment package exceeding 1.6 billion euros to complete this historic transition. Every cent of this money was an investment in a secure and independent future, free from Moscow's blackmail. The flagship of this investment was undoubtedly the HarmonyLink project. Lithuania alone spent 700 million euros on this project, which will connect it to Poland. This project also demonstrates the strategic intelligence of the Baltic states. Originally planned to be laid underwater, this high-voltage cable was redirected to a safer and more controllable land route, taking into account Russia's increasing military threats and the risk of submarine sabotage in the Baltic Sea. This was not just an engineering choice, but a wise precaution against the Kremlin's hybrid threats. At the same time, Estonia in the north completed modernization work called Estlink 2, which increased the capacity of the S2 connection between itself and Finland to 650 megawatts. This created a second lifeline connecting the Baltic countries not only to Central Europe, but also to the stable and rich Scandinavian energy market. Poland was again the cornerstone of this project. Warsaw did not just act as a transit country. It laid billions of euros worth of new cable lines to strengthen its own grid and took on the role of the main gateway and pillar of stability, enabling the full integration of the Baltic countries into the European system. All these preparations culminated in a historic step on February 8, 2025. On that day, the Baltic grids separated from the Russian system and proved they could operate independently for a full day before synchronizing with the European network. For ordinary people on the streets of Vilnius, Riga, and Tallinn, This was like a declaration of second independence. It was no longer Moscow but Brussels that controlled their lights and heating. The positive effects of this change were immediately apparent. Electricity prices fell by 15% in Latvia, 12% in Estonia, and 10% in Lithuania. Latvia earned €50 million in just 6 months by selling its surplus wind energy to Sweden. The Baltic countries won a major victory over Russia, with its 144 million people and €2 trillion economy, not with tanks or jets, but with engineering and strategic planning. The most ironic proof of how successful this Great Escape project has been and how much Russia's reputation as an energy power has been shaken came from the most unexpected place: Minsk. Even the regime of Alexander Lukashenko, Putin's most loyal ally, signaled that the country could one day break free from Moscow's energy dominance by implying that it could develop alternative energy sources to Russia by 2027. This is not a signal of betrayal, but a cry of desperation. Even Lukashenko sees how unreliable and unstable the Russian energy system he depends on has become due to war, sanctions, and its own internal decay. While all these steps were being taken, the situation in Kaliningrad was different. The region, home to about 1 million people, has become an energy island. In the past, the Lithuanian grid served as a lifeline in the event of technical failures. But now Kaliningrad is left on its own, like a ship with a broken engine in stormy seas. Electricity is entirely dependent on its own power plants. According to data, the Svetli gas station produces 450 megawatts, the old coal plants 600 megawatts, and diesel generators 300 megawatts of electricity. The total capacity of 1.88 gigawatts appears to be sufficient to meet consumption of 900 megawatts in summer and 1,200 megawatts in winter. However, these figures cannot hide the fragile nature of the system. In June 2025, a transformer station sabotaged by Ukrainian intelligence left military facilities in Kaliningrad without power. This incident demonstrated how sensitive the system is and how any outage could trigger a chain reaction of crises. This energy isolation also creates a major military vulnerability. Kaliningrad is Putin's most important pawn, even his queen, on the chessboard, and is used to threaten the entire region from Poland to Germany and from Sweden to Denmark. Kaliningrad's primary military role is to implement a concept known in NATO terminology as access/area denial. In other words, in the event of a potential crisis, it is to turn a significant part of the Baltic Sea and airspace into an inaccessible zone, where the entry or operation of NATO naval and air forces would be tantamount to suicide. To create this deadly bubble, Russia has turned this small region into one of the most heavily militarized areas in the world. The fortress's sharpest and most intimidating weapon is undoubtedly the Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile systems. These missiles are extremely accurate, can perform complex maneuvers to evade radar, and most importantly, can carry both conventional and tactical nuclear warheads. When launched from Kaliningrad, they can strike Baltic capitals such as Warsaw, Vilnius and Riga, and even Berlin, within minutes. This is not only a military threat, but also the Kremlin's most powerful political card. Baltic, the exclave's main port, is the heart of the Russian Baltic fleet. Although the fleet is largely confined to the NATO lake due to Finland and Sweden joining NATO, it remains dangerous. Modern corvettes and frigates carrying Kaliber cruise missiles pose a serious threat to both land targets and ships at sea. More importantly, Kilo-class diesel-electric submarines, lurking like ghosts in the shallow and complex waters of the Baltic Sea, are one of the biggest headaches for NATO naval planners due to their potential for ambush, mine-laying, or surprise attacks. To protect all this offensive capability from a potential NATO counterattack, Kaliningrad boasts one of the world's most dense air defense networks. Numerous S-400 Triumph batteries form a shield covering hundreds of kilometers against all kinds of air threats, from high-altitude stealth aircraft to low-flying cruise missiles. This shield guarantees that Iskander missiles and the Baltic fleet can operate without fear of retaliation. Finally, the 11th Army Corps, consisting of tens of thousands of soldiers, is permanently stationed here to defend this stronghold from the ground. The mission of these units is to repel any ground attack that might come from Poland or Lithuania and to make NATO think twice about how bloody and costly it would be to try to seize this small piece of territory. However, like any fortress, Kaliningrad has an Achilles heel, a weak point. And this weakness is a reality that the Kremlin has ignored for decades but has now become its worst nightmare: geographical isolation and logistical dependence. Kaliningrad is an island with no land connection to Russia's main territory. It is surrounded on all sides by Poland and Lithuania, both of which are now full NATO members. This geographical prison makes it extremely vulnerable logistically. Everything necessary for the fortress's survival must be delivered by sea or air. The main lifeline, the St. Petersburg-Baltics sea route, currently passes through the middle of the NATO lake. In the event of a potential conflict, Sweden's Silent Gotland-class submarines, German Type 212A submarines, the Polish and Finnish navies, and NATO air power could easily turn this route into a death corridor and completely blockade Kaliningrad from the sea. Air supply is even riskier. Russian military transport aircraft must pass through a narrow corridor filled with NATO air defense systems to reach Kaliningrad. This is almost a suicide mission. And Lithuania's latest move has added a new and most deadly link to this logistical nightmare: energy. All this advanced military equipment, especially the S-400 radar stations, command and control centers, and missile launchers that must operate 24/7, consumes enormous amounts of electricity every day. Lithuania is now dismantling its last power lines, and Kaliningrad has become a complete energy island. In the event of a potential conflict, NATO may not even need to bomb Kaliningrad's power plants. Cutting off the gas supply to these plants would suffice. Lithuania's move to dismantle these power lines is, in fact, a victory won without firing a single shot in the early stages of a potential war. It is like demolishing part of the castle walls before the war even begins. The psychological impact of this move could be as great as its physical impact. For Russian citizens living in Kaliningrad and the tens of thousands of soldiers stationed there, this is the clearest sign that the siege is complete. The last normal connection between them and the NATO countries surrounding them has now been severed. The Kremlin's response to this strategic defeat was, as expected, an angry but equally helpless condemnation. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called Lithuania's action a hostile escalation and a declaration of economic war, promising retaliation. Shortly after this statement, satellite images taken in early September showed the deployment of new Iskander missile systems with nuclear capability near the Lithuanian border and the strategic Suwałki Gap in Kaliningrad. This was Moscow's toughest military move since the network change. However, these missiles do not solve Kaliningrad's energy problem. On the contrary, by further isolating the region, it forces Moscow to allocate more resources to defend these territories, which have become more of a burden than an asset. This strategic impasse is also turning the lives of the approximately 1 million people living in Kaliningrad into hell. More than 2,500 sanctions imposed by the EU and the US are making the situation even worse. Finding spare parts for power plants has become 40% more expensive. Electricity prices have doubled compared to mainland Russia, reaching 8 rubles per kilowatt-hour. In a region where the average salary is 45,000 rubles and the average pension is 20,000 rubles, an electricity bill of 5,000 rubles is breaking the backs of many families. As people turn to wood-burning stoves for heat, supermarket shelves are emptying due to sanctions and slowing shipments. The economy of Kaliningrad, once a bustling export hub, is also on the brink of collapse. At the Yantani mine, one of the world's largest amber mines, production fell by 18% in the first quarter of 2025 due to power fluctuations. Shipments that used to be made by truck to Europe now have to be made by sea, which extends delivery times by weeks and increases costs by 15%. The region's beaches and Prussian castles, which attracted over 1 million tourists a year before the war, hosted fewer than 400,000 visitors this summer. Power outages and dim lighting in hotels have deterred tourists from the region. Fishing fleets are struggling to stay afloat due to diesel costs tripling and the need to return early to prevent their catch from spoiling. Fishing declined by 22% in August. These figures reflect not only economic hardship, but also human dramas, such as factories laying off workers and amber carvers selling bootleg vodka. Moscow is attempting to remedy the situation with a 5 billion ruble subsidy package called Island Resilience, and by adding new ferry services to St. Petersburg. However, transportation costs remain 40% higher, and winter storms threaten to completely sever this fragile supply line. Every flash of light in Kaliningrad now serves as a warning, reminding everyone how fragile the entire region has become. For the Baltic countries, this event was a source of pride and a second moment of independence. The media, schools, and ordinary people celebrated this move as a final break from the Soviet past and a triumph of sovereignty. Breaking free from the BRELL grid, a symbol of decades of Russian pressure, was not just a technical matter but also a psychological victory. This silent revolution, achieved by these three small countries with a combined population of 6 million against Russia's 144 million without firing a single bullet, thanks to engineering and determination, taught the world an important lesson. Power is not measured solely by missiles or megawatts. It is also measured by the will to stand alone, connect with the right allies, and weather the storm. So, what do you think? How much of a strategic defeat is Lithuania's power cut to Kaliningrad for Russia? How will Europe's independence from Russian energy change the global balance of power? And how will Kaliningrad's future take shape under this new reality? Share your valuable analysis and predictions with us in the comments section. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like this video to support our independent analyses.